Let's see. Well, that takes me back actually 71 years. This year in July, I'm celebrating my 70th um, a Jubilee anniversary of being a Capuchin. So that's 71 years ago when I entered. Well, I was, you know, at that time a young kid, at 18 years old, a normal high school kid, and I really didn't. Yeah, I went to the Capuchins. Why? It's hard to say. Um, I knew there was something calling there. I felt maybe a little more values than some of my peer group had at the time. But I used to pray the rosary to the Blessed Mother, take the vocation away. I wanted to go on and play football or something. And actually, I don't know how much I should say. Actually, well, I think I had a girlfriend there. I said goodbye to a couple nights before. I spent the last night with my mother. And I remember when I mentioned I was going to the novitiate, she slammed the car door and I hollered out the window. I remember, well, no, wait, I don't think I'm going to last the whole year, but I got to give it a try. But, things happen. God works in strange ways. And I entered the novitiate with those doubts, I think, a young kid. Yeah. But things changed, and I wanted to be a Capuchin, and I think I'd be happy here. I wanted to be above all a priest also, and above all, I wanted to be a missionary. And I got all three graces, all three blessings. Became a Capuchin, as I mentioned, it'll be 70 years now. And since I made my first vows, and I was ordained in 1961. I would be 63 or 64 years as a priest now, and I got my wish of being a missionary. My first assignment was the missions. I was a missionary for 40 years in Central America. Learned two languages, Spanish and also an indigenous language, which I could also speak fluently, among the Mosquito Indians. I spent 15 years in Nicaragua, 25 years in Honduras, and about 33 years of that among the Mosquito Indians. I learned their language also. A very fulfilled life. I have no regrets. Of course, there was human struggles along the way, as we all have, but I have no regrets. It's been a blessed, fulfilled life. After retiring from the missions in 2003, one time I got all around the world once, and also got to Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and I enjoyed that experience. I enjoyed working with different cultures and just beautiful people all over. And above all, I enjoyed the 40 years in Central America, in Nicaragua, Honduras. As I say, I have no regrets, and it was a very blessed life. As I recall the scriptures, I often think of the Lord says, you give up family, mother, father, wife, children, and land, you be blessed a hundredfold. And I can say that I've been blessed a hundredfold. To this day, I got good health yet at 88 and still driving and still helping out, limited right now, limited. Helping at St. Paul's Home 3 times a week, Sunday Mass, and also one Mass every Sunday in our Capuchin Parish, St. Joseph's Parish here. So it's been a beautiful life. The novitiate at that time was in Detroit, of all places. We're in Detroit, and we're locked up in that little square there, you know. I remember my father came to visit me one time, and he took him to that back door, and he looked out at that backyard, and he said, "How did you last a year here?" and it was because I was used to fishing and hunting and the outdoors, and yeah, well, different, but that's what you vow. You were happy there. So I remember that. That was in Detroit, the novitiate job. Oh, I'm a Yooper, Iron Mountain, Michigan. Iron Mountain, Kingsford, Michigan. I like the outdoors, skiing and skating, hockey playing, and I love sports a lot. and the winter sports and football, everything. I was professed in '54. I think Solanus was there that novitiate year. We didn't have much contact, I think, but he was in. I spent about a year and a half or 2 years with him in Huntington, Indiana, in my philosophy years. So that was about 2 years. 55, 56, I think. Those 2 years, I think he was in, and I think he died. He left in '57, I think. Yeah, so we were about 2 years together, and have very interesting. Had a great respect for him. We have a lot of stories about him when he was there, and we knew the way people would come. They took him out of Detroit because there are the people, and they all ended up coming to Huntington busloads. And the story was if you asked him for a favor, and he'd say, "Well, God, with his voice, oh, God's will be done." Well, you expect the worst. And if he said, the other thing was, "Oh, I'll go pray for you," and then you didn't worry. And I had a very interesting experience. I got a call from my brother that my mother was suffering a very grave danger of death. She had a blood clot that was passing through her lungs and her heart, and it went to it could be fatal, I guess, back there in 1955, I think it was. And my brother called me, and it was about 7 o'clock in the evening, and told me, "Your mother's in very danger uh, health condition with that blood clot passing through her body." So I ran up to Solanus' room and knocked on the door. And at that time, he knelt down, and he was in a chair. And I looked up at Father Solanus. I said, "Will you please pray for my mother? She's in very dangerous health situation." And he jumped off the chair, and he just left me. He ran by me. I can still see his feet flopping down the corridor. He ran to chapel to pray for my mother. And the next morning, they found him sleeping in chapel there. And that night, I went to my room. I didn't worry. I knew my mother's going to be okay. It was about a day and a half later, my brother called, and he said, "I want to let you know, mother's okay. The blood clot came out in the other arm and dissolved it." And I said, "Oh, I know she was going to be okay." "What do you mean?" I said, "I went to Father Solanus. He ran down to chapel to pray for her. That's it." And since then, I had a great favor for Father Solanus. And he wasn't blessed at the time, but a very holy man. And during my whole career, I later on became blessed. But during my whole life, many people come and pray, "Father, pray for this, pray for that," and I would bless them in Father Solanus' name and ask them to pray for the missions, or be generous to the missions, and he'll take care of you. And I got such responses back, I can't believe. You want to hear an interesting story? I was in the missions there, and Mari Bell, I have contact with her in Portland Pier. She's still head of our Catholic radio station. Well, I went down there after I left there, after I think it was 8 years. I went back, I think, and celebrated my 50th anniversary as a priest back where I spent 25 years as a priest, but I left it in the hands of others. And I come back home after 8 years. I went back there to celebrate my 50 years of the priesthood, since I said I spent the 25 years there. And Mary Bell was there, and the head of the radio station. And she come in, and she says, she said, "No, I got to quit working in this radio. My hand, I got the rheumatoid." She said, "It's so painful, I can't move my fingers." And I said, "Give me those hands." And I blessed them in Father Solanus' name, and asking intercession of St. Francis, of Blessed Solanus. I said, he's not going to let you leave this work. He just loves the mission. He wants you to continue to spread the word of God among the mosquito people through the Catholic radio. He'll take care of you. The most embarrassing thing, the next morning, she come running into the Casa Corral, the priest's house. Father John, you're a saint." I said, "What?" She said, "The pain went away from my hand. I still got the rheumatism, but the pain went away from my hands." I said, "That's Father Solanus." She's still working with Catholic radio. She says she's still got the rheumatism, but she can still, and she's going to retire soon. But she's still working. That was back in 2011, I think. She's still working Catholic radio, and the pain never came. And she's got a little plaque or something, and she always prays to Father Solanus. And that was an interesting story I thought you might enjoy. It wasn't the easiest life. I'm not complaining. I enjoyed the challenge. The first challenge was learning the language. We were sent down those days with very little preparation. I think I had 3 months at Georgetown University and a semester in Spanish that really didn't work out because the professor went with the Jesuits who were teaching in Spanish in high school. And he said, "Oh, my babies will learn the missions." So that was a useless 3 months. I think I could, when I got down to Honduras, Nicaragua there, uh, what I could say was maybe Buenos dias, buenas tardes, me llamo Juan Francisco. That's about all I could say in Spanish, you know. So I had to learn the language, which took at least a good 3 years of study and learning from the kids and making mistakes and embarrassing mistakes and everything, but learning from the streets and from the people until I could speak fluently. And when I could laugh at their jokes, then I knew the language enough, and did well after that. After 40 years in the language, and then after about I don't know how many years, 3 or 4 years, no, about yeah, no, about I was among Hispanic work, the Spanish maybe for 7, 8 years, and then they needed help for the Mosquito area, and so I joined that. I offered myself for that to learn the language because I wanted to be a complete missionary that could attend both to the Spanish speaking and the indigenous Mosquito people. Well, I ended up, I think it was the longest missionary working among the Mosquitoes, 33 years. Their language was harder to learn. It took me 5 years at least to get comfortable in their language fluently. Those were the greatest challenges, learning the language, because I'm not a linguist, I'm not a bright student, and it took me a challenge to learn the language, but I learned it fluently, that I could preach in the language and teach, inform the lay leaders in the language. Those were the greatest challenges. There's a lot of stories I could tell you. I got all written up in my memoirs. There's some interesting things. Well, the life of first about the life was among the poor. I enjoyed that. I worked among and the Mosquito people were the poorest of the poor. Travel was all by well in Nicaragua and what they call the bush country, the jungle. That was mostly traveled by mule and horseback, and up the hills through muddy traveling in the rain and dangerous slipping with the mules, and it was a challenge. And 7-hour trips from one chapel to the next, and on mules, and oh, so many stories coming. I don't know. I think I don't think, and bore you with them or get too round up in them. But and then when in the Mosquito area was a little different travel. It was mostly by boat, and a lot of walking also. Some by walking to get to the villages. Where I ended up last was 25 years in Puerto Limpida. I had I was pastor most of the good part of those years. We had 73 villages to visit with chapels, and we could get there only at most villages twice a year. So when we weren't on trips visiting villages, we were giving courses to lay people. The women were the catechists, the men were the lay pastors, and they kept the faith alive because we couldn't be there. And the greatest the beauty of for me was a strong lay church that kept the faith alive. That was, I think we were years ahead of the church in the States, and and those were my experiences. Were hard to adapt to some things here now, and I still got that spirit and that love for the missions and those ideals, and that was something. There was danger travel, traveling in Olympia across the lagoon. You get caught in some storms. It was very scary sometimes, get blown off course. And the waves, you had to make 3 waves. If that third wave, you got washed in the third wave, you could go under. People died in the lagoons. I remember a story sometime I was coming across with sister one time, a very bad storm. And I said, "Sister, are you ready? You always want to die on the feast of the Blessed Mother." And I think it was in September. It was the Blessed Mother's birthday. I said, "Are you ready?" It was terrible, and the waves are, it was 5, 6 foot, and these pit pan with the motorboat. You just hear it go. You have to catch the water. If it doesn't catch the water, to get you over. And she said, "No, no, not I don't want to die on this day." On the Blessed Mother, you know. So there was dangers in traveling, and one time I got hit by lightning, working on as I say. Wait, before I get that, I'll say, uh, when we went down, we drove down, and we went through Mexico City, and we stopped off at the Guadalupe Shrine, but the new basilica wasn't built, the old basilica. And there was nobody hardly there. We had a kind of a private tour, and he brought us up to the statue, and he showed us, talked about the mantle and the cross that was bent over because they tried to bomb it, and nothing happened. And just before I left the cathedral, knelt down when they were going out. I knelt down, and I said, offer up my missionary life to the protection, to our Blessed Mother, put myself under her protection. And I could tell you stories how that came so true. One would be the one about the lightning. I was working with a handyman in Waspam, Nicaragua, and it was I remember the date, the 17th of November, 1977, at about 12 to 4 in the afternoon. There was a rumble on the sky. There was big fluffy clouds, but it wasn't look like storm. But there was a rumble off, and I looked and I said, "Oh, my rain or thunder might be coming." I said, we got 12 minutes to finish up here quit at 4. Let's just finish up. We were trying to get the wire off of together. He was on one side like that, and I was on like facing you, like, and we're pulling on the wire. And at that moment, he disappeared. There was just a bright light, and Jose Bremen, he's called his name. There was a bright light. He just disappeared. And I don't know if I said it or was thinking, what's happening? Because it was so bright I couldn't see him. And all of a sudden, I felt something on this arm pull me off the wire. And I flew back about 10 feet. And I was paralyzed, and the heat was coming out of my extremities, the hands and the feet. And I looked up at him. He was still hanging on the wire. I said, "Thank God you're okay. I think I'm paralyzed here." Like that. And all of a sudden, I saw his eyes, and I smelt the burning flesh, and he was being electrocuted. And then he went down, and I forced myself up, and I couldn't resuscitate him. So I ran over and got the nurses, but they couldn't resuscitate him, and he died. And next day we had to walk down there. You have to bury the next day. But I often thought of that, knelt before our Blessed Mother in Guadalupe there, put on her protection. Why the Lord called him? He had a child, 5 years old, and not me. And there's something I felt the protection and the Blessed Mother. And there's other stories too that I could tell so I felt blessed in many ways. That was a paradise, so with beautiful people, really dedicated, really Christian, Catholic Christian people, lovely people. Yeah, they lived a nice, simple life, and down to earth. They were nice. That was enjoyable. I think I made 14 trips there altogether. Join the Capuchin, see the world.
Right. Yeah.
The only thing that comes to my mind now, when on retreats or something, you go back there and you just say, "Lord, why me?" Why, I knew who I was, and I say a normal high school kid to some degree, and I can't figure out. One of the questions. I think the last retreat we had, something came up. He talked about joining the order and a plan that God had, and he asked, like, why me? And on some reflection, that was been coming back. Yeah, I often, why me? Devil that I was, I don't know. You don't know. The thing is, well, you have to let God take over your life and follow the signs, and with faith and hope in your heart, it works out. I guess I don't know. It's a mystery to me. It's beautiful way that God worked in my life. And I didn't do great things. God did great things through me. And when I celebrated my 50 years as a priest, you remember what I said? I used to, as a kid there was a Lourdes shrine I had in the house, a Lourdes shrine, and with the little stream, I had by it. And I remember I used to steal vigil lights from the church as an altar where I put it. I prayed the rosary, take away this vocation. I didn't want to go on. And 50 years later, and I would go to Spain to visit the sisters I worked with for many years in a mission. And I asked them one day, could you get me to Lourdes? I'd like to go back. I'd like to go to Our Lady of Lourdes. And it was too early. They said, geez, the tourist trips haven't started yet. And she said, you can take a bus and get here, and then the next, stay overnight, another bus here. And I didn't have that time, I just had those 4 days. I wouldn't work out. And I said, well. And the other sister I was with her, she said, I don't believe the Blessed Mother is not going to let you get to Lourdes. And the superior went back to her office. She was there talking with her. She picked up a leaflet, and there she saw an advertisement of a group of sisters planning a trip to Lourdes. And she come and said to me, I said, well, call them. And she called them. They said, there's one seat left. I said, take it. And because that was a Friday. They were leaving a Sunday morning, I guess. And all I had to do was drive me down to the sister's place. And she said, if there's another place, I'll send sister with you, Michaela, the one I worked with for 25 years, or 20 years in the missions, was 25 years. And sure enough, there's another place open, so both sister and Michaela and I went back to Lourdes. I got to Lourdes, and that's Friday afternoon. I remember sitting there all one afternoon just before the Lourdes statue up there, and I was thinking, thank you, Mary, for not answering my prayer, for not answering my prayer. So that was, I think, and Mary in that sense was a favorite saint, and the Guadalupe also. And as I mentioned, Solanus Casey, although he wasn't a saint, a favor. Of course, Saint Francis, I think, was also one of our that presented to us in our formation. Well, of course, I had a great devotion to Saint Francis. I think one of the things I think that's where my missionary vocation came from, was strengthened, because on the words that Saint Francis spoke, that the crucifix of San Damiano spoke to Saint Francis, go rebuild my church. And Francis took those, when he understood it, those words, he went and back to not building a physical church, but went back to reform the church. And St. Francis' ideal to me was always to serve the needs of the church. And that's what I got out of my devotion to St. Francis, to fulfill the needs of the church, not so much community life or contemplative life or, prayer life and that, but fulfill the needs of the church. And that's where I think gave me a strong missionary vocation, because I thought that's one of the greatest needs, and that's what Francis, and he himself was a missionary. And I look at it today, and I even maybe wrote to the province today and says, in our last form we had to fill out, I says, Francis's ideal was always to serve the needs of the church. And when you look at the lack of priests today, of pastoral ministers to serve the parishes, I think that's why can't we develop, because we're fading out of parish ministry. And my idea, I think Francis isn't that the greatest needs of the church today, and that's what Francis would answer. Why wouldn't we take that as one of our ministries to foster, rather than feeding it out? It won't go over too good, but that's what I believe. That's my ideal of Francis, to fulfill the needs of the church. And I think one of the greatest needs a Franciscan fulfill is being a good Franciscan pastor in our parish. Now you're among the people also. So that's my ideal. But I think those are the saints, would be Mary, Solanus, and Francis, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, I've been to CZ. I went to with my brother. I spent 6 days with my brother. My brother was a Capuchin, Father Burton Samsa. He was a mission. And then he answered a call to be a chaplain. The provincial asked him, and he was a military chaplain for 24 years. and he spent 1 year in Vietnam. And when he was in Germany, he got me over on a chartered flight, and we went. We drove to Assisi. Spent 6 days together in Assisi, and so I've been to Assisi about that one time. Oh, then I took our when I retired from the missions, I took the Capuchin Heritage Program, which spent another month in Assisi. And then one time I signed up to have the head of a pilgrimage to Europe. I think it was Italy, and it fell apart. There was nobody. The last minute, someone signed up from the. I was in Tucson. I spent 6 years in Tucson in Hispanic ministry. Someone from the cathedral signed up, and the woman that called me from this company that was run by a priest, and she said, "Oh, you can go." I said, "Well, nobody signed up, only one." And he said, "Oh, the priest in charge said, he's a retired priest, let him go, you know." So I got a free $4,000 trip, and I said, "Well, what?" He said, "Well, maybe when you continue on to Portugal," we went to Fatima. He said, "Maybe they might need you there." Well, there was all kinds of priests that celebrated. I had nothing to do, so I got a free trip. I really appreciate that priest. He just said, "Take them along." So that was another trip that brought me to Assisi. And then I became a tour guide for the ones I was accompanied by, because I'd been there more and I could show them some other things that weren't on the schedule. Oh, it was before the San Damiano cruise. I spent a lot of time there because I said that inspired me so much. The words of Francis, "Go rebuild my church," that gave me my spirit. And I spent a lot of time in San Damiano. That was very, very touching. And yeah, I think I remember that most. And then down below, no, that was in this cross was up in St. Clair Chapel at the time. Then my brother took me down below the San Damiano. My brother knew quite a bit about Assisi. He took me down there, and that was inspiring when they brought up where Claire used to sleep up there. They just had a place marked where Claire slept on the floor there. That was kind of touching. I felt kind of a closeness there. So yeah, that was Assisi was, and then to go up on the mountain, Mount Subiaco. I remember a time I shouldn't have mentioned that. Well, I don't know if I was asked to be a bishop down there twice, and I didn't want. That's not for me. When he and that's why. Well, the reason why I was on the mount, I went up for a day of recollection, and I brought that up there for an answer, and I answered, and I come down with my brother. I said, "Bert, the answer is no. I don't not. I'm giving the answer no. That's not for me." And that's how that come in. But I was asked twice down there when I was among the Mesquite. They're forming a new diocese, and they asked me, and I didn't want it. And I got called over by the nuncio to the to Tegucigalpa, and I remember they sent a car for me. They had one of these all dressed up with their own collar, all suit, and opened the door for me. I'm dressed in my mission. I just regular clothes. I didn't have no collar on to go see the nuncio, and I was there. But he asked me about it. I said no. I said, "Just take my name off. I want to be with the people." He said, "That's what we want." So I said no. Then he got sick, and they put it off for 2 years, and then they came back again. And my bishop told me, "You better write a letter to him," because. So I wrote a nice letter and gave him all kinds of reasons why it's best I stay there where I am, because the war was ending. We had to rebuild our parish, and I says, there are only two of us there now that can speak the language. The other one said that if you take that job, he's not going to take over as pastor. He says, "I'll go home. I'm going home." I said, there'd be no one to take care of this area. I said, "It's best I stay here and rebuild the church." And he wrote back. I got everything saved in my memoirs. He wrote back and said, "You're a missionary at heart. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it." He could see that, and they found another Franciscan priest. But it was a good choice. No, I never. No, I was happy where I was. I didn't want that. Well, I just serve the church and serve the people, uh, in a spirit of service, and humility, not to look for anything in return, and to give yourself to whatever gifts God give you to share them humbly with the people. I enjoyed the life I had as a missionary, and I enjoyed when I retired. I had some nice years continued, and I mentioned I had 6 years in Tucson in a Hispanic ministry. I think I missed the Hispanic ministry right now a lot. Not much of that here, but I'm just thankful that the Lord has given me good health. I figure it's for a reason, and as long as the Lord continues to ask me to serve, I'll be God's will be done. I'm very thankful for my good health. At 88 years old, I can drive and still do ministry. So that's I think that's where I'm at now, and I'm happy at that. And whatever comes, and I said that not that I did great things, but I think the Lord did great things through me.